Kia ora and welcome to Muffin Talk. A radio program is brought to you by the initiative Titipounamu, Study and Joy. Muffin Talk is a weekly radio program to which I invite guests to talk about their work and their passion for issues on community programs, social justice, religions and faiths, and the care of the earth. Today I have invited Dr. Florian Graichen to a Zoom recording for broadcast. Florian, a warm welcome and hi to our radio program.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here and to join you.
And thank you for joining us today. Dr. Florian Graichen is originally from Germany and has been living in Aotearoa, New Zealand for a few years. He is the general manager of forests to biobased products for the Crown Research Institute, Scion, based in Rotorua. Florian, I understand that you have studied in Regensburg. This is a beautiful city surrounded by forests. Is this where your interest in forests comes from?
It's a good question. I wondered that myself. So I was born in Munich, but I grew up in the near Regensburg, Bavarian forests, so one of the largest forestry parts of Central Europe. So now where I'm living in Rotorua, having lakes around yourself is quite common, I'm used to that. Forest was for me always the place as a kid to grow up, where you played, going hiking, mountain biking, whatever it was. So I never looked at it from an economical or as a supplier of feedstock. Yes, we used wood-fired oven and things like that, but that's what it used to be. It was more than through when I studied chemistry, did a postdoc in New Zealand, worked then in Australia, worked in Belgium, and that was all targeted to sustainability and material that could replace fossil-based feedstock. And so more and more then you notice the importance of trees in that context. So the trees in the context of what trees provide us, but also as a provider of feedstock and materials for energy and all the things we could replace that is coming from petrochemical resources.
I think that Bavaria has programs for many, many decades of regrowing forests and regrowing trees. So I think that you come from the right area to think about sustainability and forests. Definitely.
Yeah. Yes. I think it is interesting to, as you say the right word, regrowing. And if you think about, when the use of forest, and you have to look at it way beyond just the material, the product. There's all the services that you provide. Healthy air, water quality, the joy people get out of walking through a forest, and then the opportunity, wooden building, wood construction, but also chemicals, materials, fuel. So it's truly magical what biomass can provide.
Oh, you just mentioned the word biomass. Can you just quickly say what is biomass for those listeners who might not be so familiar with the term?
Oh, yes, fair enough. We always assume that biomass sounds a bit. No, it is. If you look around yourself, it's a terminology for everything that we could grow. So it is trees is biomass. It's horticulture, like crops. It is in the marine environment, seaweed is biomass, it's grass. So it's all material where plants use CO2 to accumulate the CO2 in their mess in a trunk of a tree, and this the type of carbon of material that we could use then without digging into the ground and extracting more coal or crude oil or gas out of these resources.
Mm-hmm. And bio means life, so I think that it's something to do with life. And recently there has been some discussion about ways of how to move away from fossil fuels.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about possible options, or what are you aware of?
I think this is the big topic at the moment. So we had just the COP meeting in COP27 in Egypt, and we all know these massive challenges that we are facing as the world, basically. So it's two things. Once we live on this planet and we use its resources, it's renewable resources, as if we have a second planet in our back pocket. And so that is not sustainable. We can't keep living the way we're living and just exploiting. So it has to come back to this regenerative thinking. So that's one element. And the other part is we're facing a planet with 10 billion people, and these people, we need to dress people, we need furniture, we need our day-to-day items for living, and we can talk about we can design them better, we can reuse them better, we can limit our fashion to, instead of 6 fashion cycles, to 1. So there are all these things, but we still need material, we still need energy. And if we don't want to use fossil resources, because the more of that we use, the more CO2 we release in the atmosphere, the worse we make the climate challenge, we need to find alternatives. And so this is where, for example, biomass, trees, and other bio-based feedstock is absolutely urgent, and we start to relearn basically how to use that.
Can you give us some examples?
Well, it's an interesting one. If I look at my work or the areas that I'm looking after, there is both in the material side, but also on the energies, material being products. So you could imagine some of the plastics we are using today, they can be designed better. Instead of making the plastics as it is now from fossil or from crude oil, you can make it from material coming from a tree, for example.
How does that work?
You have different ways. You take a tree apart in its components. One of these components, for example, is sugar, and you use then little microbes, like you would brew beer. You can similar concept. You can get them to make plastics, for example. Or if you think about, take cosmetics as an example, there are quite interesting components in cosmetics, like anti-inflammatory, or what makes you look and feel younger. And a lot of these components, actually, instead of coming from crude oil, they could come from plants. We're seeing that already. Or on the energy side, it's also a very interesting element where, yes, we need to save energy, and yes, we have opportunities around geothermal or solar or wind, all these things we know, but there are elements, parts of the energy that we can't replace easily. And that is, for example, aviation fuel. And this is where, biomass could become very, very useful, that we can replace fossil fuel there.
So you're going from the very rational side. You say, first of all, we look at what can we replace easily, and then there will still be some challenges. How much is it used already, these ways of producing oil through biomass?
I think at the moment, probably one of the most common parts that you see in the media is aviation fuel, and there is more and more companies. There are planes that are already tested or to be flown on at least parts of aviation fuel used. So this is now getting into the market. So that's happening. We are seeing in plastics probably 2 to 3% of all the plastics used is now bio-based, and the demand is enormous, because nearly every big global brand owner has a target around sustainability, reusability, bio-based type materials. So it's becoming actually more and more dominant entering the market. It's still early stages. We still only have some parts of it, but I think it will, over the next 10, 15 years, it will really take off.
And I remember a few years ago, or some years ago, there was this big wave of biodiesel, and
Yes.
then people were complaining that poor countries
Yes.
started to have monoculture, and they lost their own ground for their crops, so they were hungry in
Yes.
order to feed the Western countries with fuel.
Yes.
What do you say in regards of that?
Yeah, and I think this is where we definitely have to learn from the past, and this is why it is important to refer to what we are doing as sustainable. And sustainable is more than just economic sustainable, like running a profitable business. It has to be socially sustainable, and it has to be environmentally, ecologically sustainable. if you take these lenses now forward, what has been done there with going into the tropical rainforest, chopping down the rainforest, and planting monocultures, does not meet the criteria of sustainability. So when we talk about bioenergy now, it's important to say where do you plant it? So New Zealand has a strategic huge advantage for that, because we've got the land you can plant in areas that are not used for, say, food production, for example, and you can be very specific how much you would plant and what type of plantings you do. So that's a very critical part of it. It's not just making the material or making the fuel. It's really going right back to the society, to the environment, and to ensure that what is planted is done in a sustainable, in a societal and environmentally sustainable way.
You also just mentioned what is planted, because there are some trees that take very long to grow and others grow faster. And if you say that you're using the bark, you might not be able to use any bark because trees have different barks.
So that's an interesting. So you're referring to a program that we are running around utilizing the bark of a tree. In that context, we wouldn't use it just exclusively for bioenergy. So this is an example where, at the moment, when we're exporting our logs overseas, we need to take the bark of these logs. So that's 1 to 2 million tons of bark. And bark is absolutely fascinating, because bark is kind of the protective armor of a tree. It protects it against UV, against insects. It protects it from dehydrating. And all this is done by really fascinating little components in the bark. And what we are interested in is, like, how can we take these components out of something that you would use more than in a little bit of your garden that's pretty much left behind. And these components are truly fascinating. So you can use it in cosmetics. We have now used a molecule out of bark, which is called tannin. So this is, the process of making leather requires something to maintain the leather. And we are using that in that process instead of toxic chemicals. And then right at the end, you can still use it for energy purposes. So this is, to really think about, if we take the inspiration there from nature, that nature does not know or understand the concept of waste. So what we want to do is truly use every piece of a tree or other materials and maximize it in its use, so we don't throw anything away.
When you mentioned tannin, I also had to think of, for example, the Pompalia house up north, where the Maoris have been producing leather for leather books, and it was all organic, or it was all material that they found on site. I'm just wondering, when you think of our industries today, this was just for a small market, was just for a few books. But if you want to supply the material for the world, that would be very challenging, wouldn't it?
That's correct. And I think this is not, the material won't be exclusively supplied by New Zealand. I think there are other countries as well. So this is where we have to think about, where would it come from? But we can certainly play a significant role there. And we've now shown that we can use this tannin in fashion items. As I said, we made with New Zealand shoe manufacturer, we made leather boots and demonstrated, yes, we can do that. So there is then the interest. Could I, at least certain parts of it could be that supplied and exported. So that's a big opportunity actually for New Zealand to, instead of just exporting, relatively cheap commodity that has not been very much refined, to something that is of much higher value, that requires jobs and employment in New Zealand. So it's good for New Zealand, but it's also good for the world.
And we are very close to Christmas now. And I just recently, I gave a talk about Christmas trees and Advent wreaths. And according to Germanic traditions, trees have always been extremely important. And but also according to Maori culture, you have the Tane Mahuta, the god of the forest, which was the one who let light into the world. And you are working the forestry sector in Rotorua. Are you working together with the Tangata Whenua there?
Yes, so this is a really important part for it. So we are here in Te Papatipu Innovation Park in Rotorua. And for us, the relationship and the partnership the mana whenua is absolutely critical. So there are a couple of things on that topic where we try to now really authentically build that relationship. We were gifted the name of the new building that we are in here, a 3-story wooden building, Te Wharenui Tutiata, so the common ancestor that the 3 hapu basically relate to. So we have a really an obligation to uphold this privilege and this gift, but also the pathway or the road towards this spectacular building, the Wharenui Tutiata, has been renamed from Long Mile Road to Tito Karangi Drive to reflect that as well. So that's critical for us. But what we see is this huge gift that New Zealand has been presented with, that we have an additional knowledge system to address the global challenges with. So we have the indigenous knowledge, we have the global science system, and we try to do a lot of our work, science, innovation to position that at the interface of traditional Te Maori knowledge, global scientific knowledge, and we see that truly magic happens at the interface of these 2 knowledge systems.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think that's so important, as you say. I just wanted to go back to some of the examples that I saw in articles about science projects.
Sure.
And I see that you had, we talked about the bark, but there's also seaweed and clothes that are recycled in new ways. Can you give us an example?
These are 2 really beautiful examples of sustainability and how sustainability triggers innovation. So we should maybe start with the seaweed. So we're working there with a New Zealand company called AgriSea. We had this as a highly treasured relationship of ours for about 5 years now, where they have been working with seaweed for their cosmetic and for their well-known applications. So we have seen that processing seaweed in novel and new ways really creates highly innovative products. And so now we are partnering with that company to build and to create manufacturing possibilities in Paroa in a very rural and regional setting to manufacture products out of seaweed that's called nanocellulose hydrogels or nanocellulose fibers. And the fascinating applications of that ranges from wound care to, say, surgical masks, but even to elements of batteries and supercapacitors. So you could imagine like the value that that could create. This is the science side that makes it so exciting. But then what it means for the community, suddenly you have the opportunity to have these high-tech jobs in regional and rural settings, be truly sustainable, and how you grow then rural and regional communities around that is truly fascinating. So that's the work with AgriSea. Around the textiles, so this is where we were privileged to partner with a company called Usefully, and they're really the leaders in New Zealand around circular textile industry. So at the moment, about 200,000 tons of textile goes to landfill in New Zealand.
How many? 200,000?
200,000 tons of textiles, if I got my numbers right. And annually. And we saw that this is a resource we should actually be using. We're talking here about nothing that can be reused or done in a different way. So we're not arguing, or we're not saying, look, of course, use less and reuse and design better everything, but you still have something that will go to landfill. At the same time, we're importing certain additives or certain material that you need for roading applications to make our road. And we developed a process where we can use this textile waste, process that, and instead of importing, thousands of tons of these additives, we can use this type of material, similar function. So avoid import, use something instead of landfilling. And we are now in the process of working with that company on, how do we demonstrate the technology? How do we scale that technology? And how do we get this off the ground?
That sounds really interesting. And I like the idea of reusing and recycling in a different way. That's wonderful. So with all these wonderful projects, do you think it is realistic to envision a future without using any fossil fuel-based plastics?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And when I speak at conferences, I answer that with two slides. So one is basically if you envisage the use of petroleum, amount of petroleum across the world plotted against a timeline. And if you've been using petroleum for about 100, 150 years now, and that goes up and down and slightly down. If you now would expand the timeline to the year 1000, to the year 3000, and you do the same, then nothing has been used. And then there will be this little blip around the year 2000 where petrochemicals will be used, and then we will not use it again. So if you are a person in the year 2100 or so looking backwards, you will probably smile and think about the people living in this time. What were they thinking? Taking something that is so unsustainable and building a whole economy around it. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, at the moment, it's the question is not if, it's like when we do that. It's a little bit like the Stone Age. The Stone Age didn't stop because we were running out of stones. The Stone Age stopped because we developed better materials. And this is the same with the fossil age. We will not drill into the ground until we've taken the last drop of oil out. New and better ways are coming. And a lot of predictions look at, say, the year 2050, for example, where we will likely use 3 times as much plastics, but that plastics will come from better recycled systems. It will come from bio-based systems, it could be from trees, but also from direct use of CO2 in the atmosphere. So you have different types of sustainable use of materials, all avoiding the use of what is underground. So I think it's not if, just when we do that. The other important part to that is it's not just a simply not using fossil fuel anymore. It's a whole rethinking the system. Fashion is one. Do we really need 6 fashion cycles? Can I have 10 billion people in a middle class? Everyone uses 6 fashion cycles. So there is more than just fuel or better feedstock. It is rethinking new business models. Where you can shared cars. You need mobility. You don't necessarily need a car. Could you exchange things? Could you need access but not ownership? So I think there is much more to it. So it's not simply a same economy now, different feedstock. There will be a whole system change to it.
I think that these are really important points that you just mentioned. Also, during the pandemic, we learned that we don't have to have everything in a face-to-face meeting. We can have every now and then a face-to-face meeting and otherwise a Zoom meeting. And we can spread news very quickly through computers. But then, of course, we need electricity, and we are with the next challenge. But I think, yes, it's wonderful what you are doing. And I hope that we'll all see it as very natural in the future, that your prediction of having the spike of using fossil fuels and then not using them at all after some decades, it's a really good way to look out. And I think these researchers, that they give hope to people who say, where are we going to? Are we all collapsing in a few years if we don't do anything? And what can we do? They are helpless. So I really thank you for all your work. And I hope that we'll see it in everybody's daily life in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it is really important, to tell the good stories. I think there is no silver golden bullet, and it is that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. Not important. I think it's not so important where you start. It's important that you start, and a lot of people can do a lot of things. So it matters. Each personal attitude matters, and every person's action matters. So I think that's important.
And you also said something about avoiding unnecessary plastics, for example. So
absolutely. So there is a whole hierarchy of avoiding, reuse, recycle. All of that does not take it away from that. We need still better materials.
Yes.
All of that has to go in one. It's not I can tell you one solution that will solve the whole issue. That does not exist.
No, and everybody can do something. So
Absolutely.
We can start in looking at what we are doing and what can we avoid, or what is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And we leave the scientific thing to the scientists and take it on board when it comes out and we can use it.
No, but I think also it is everyone can picture that, because if you think about, you know, the year 2100 in 80 years looks so far away. But then I look at my kids, and I think that applies to everyone. You could nearly say everyone who's alive today will love someone who's alive in 80 years.
Mhm.
So your action today matters, what you do, maybe not for you, but for your children, grandchildren, whoever you love. And so I think it is important. It's beyond, us and our generation. It's much, much more than that.
I remember there's the saying from Saint-Exupéry, who said that we are not inheriting the land, the nature from our ancestors. We are borrowing it from the next generations.
Absolutely.
And I
Yes.
think if we have this in mind, we'll be more careful.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
thank you very much, Florian.
Thank you very much.
For further information, please check out my website at www.studyjoy.nz. Kia kaha, keep safe, and thanks again, Florian.
Thank you very much.